Donnie Jones is the Vice President of Power Supply Operations at Oklahoma Gas and Electric. Donnie, thank you for being here. Steve Baker next to Cody Graves. Steve is Vice President of Distribution Operations for a public service company of Oklahoma. And Cody Graves is with us. Cody Graves is President of Automated Energy. Automated Energy is a leading information technology firm that provides business and industry with customized web-based energy information services. And Cody also served several years as a member of the Corporation Commission. And to our far right is Don Shandy. Don is a director at the Oklahoma City law firm Crowe and Dunlevy. His specialty is energy regulation, and Don will be weighing in on many of the regulatory challenges that the industry is facing in applying these new digital solutions and technologies. Once again, put your hands together for our panelists today. Well, I'd like to start off with an overall broad question that I'd like to hear from each of you about how would you describe the space as you see it today, the digital solutions in power generation and in distribution. How would you describe this space today, and what are some of the big challenges the industry faces and some of the potentials of digital technology in both power generation, the consumer side, and distribution and transmission? I'd like to start with you, Donnie, if I could.
You know, Sean, I love the way he set that up where he said long ago was 6 years, right? I mean, we all kind of chuckled at that. That is the truth of the world we're in right now. And when you think of, I'll start with power generation. Just, you know, so Oklahoma Gas and Electric, just within the last 3 years, we retired units that were 1950 vintage. I mean, that's Eisenhower. And now those units took about 30 hours to go from we need you on the line to you're on the line. We replaced those with technology that takes 9 minutes and 50 seconds. So 9 minutes and 50 seconds, we can have 450 megawatts on the line. And I mean, why is that important? Today in Oklahoma, you can wake up one morning and there will be 70% of the energy flowing being from wind generation. That is incredible. And go back 10 years ago, it would be difficult to chase that kind of generation. To try to take 1950s vintage units and say, hey, the wind just dropped 50% over the next hour. So it went from 70% on to 35%. Now you got to take units off or put units on. We could not have done that. We have to have different technology to manage how we put units onto the grid, to manage renewable energy like wind, like solar, like batteries. So that's why today we have to have combustion turbines that can get on the line in 9 minutes and 50 seconds. And then Sean mentioned emissions, you know, and the role we're playing in reducing our carbon footprint. I mean, we've reduced sulfur dioxide by 90% since 2005. 75% nitrogen oxide, 40% carbon dioxide, 80% mercury. And we're doing that through technology. Low NOx burners is a good example. So, you know, we've just got to continue to stay innovative. You know, and for OG&E, you know, in particular, we love fuel diversity. So we love wind generation. We really enjoy solar generation. But we also like gas generation and coal generation. And it's how we keep up with technology to ensure that we continue to reduce that carbon footprint over time, but also allow us to keep a stable grid. Because that grid gets unstable, that's when we all get a little scary. So,
very good. Thank you, Donnie. Cody, what can consumers expect from the age of big data? As we collect more data, what is on the horizon on the consumer side?
Well, that is one of the challenges, is to deal with the immense volume of data that's now available. When we first started working with customer-facing applications back in 2000, it literally involved pulling a phone line to an electric meter and ringing it up with a modem every night to pull the data off. Now, and you heard Sean talk about the ability to instantly know what's going on in their networks. I can remember being on the commission, and the folks from OG&E came in and very proudly talked about one of the innovations they had just rolled out was a software application that cut in half the time it took to map out the phone calls that came in when there were outages. Now, one of the things that Sean didn't talk about was even though you fixed the line, you didn't necessarily know you got everybody until someone came home from work that evening and then called you back to say, hey, my power's not on, my neighbor's on, right? And now you've got the ability to instantly do that. So all the data that goes into operating networks, we've done a very good job as an industry and as policymakers, regulators, and I say that as a recovering regulator, internally, figuring out how to optimize efficiency in operations and systems. Where we have not spent a lot of time is the outward-facing part of that. What is the additional value that we can leverage, right, by sharing some of that information, not all, some of that information to customers, and that's the real challenge. The other part of that is not every utility in America has an advanced system like OG&E has, who was really one of the first with the really securing some of that DOE money back in 2007, 8, and 9, right, taking advantage of that. PSO is now rolling that out across their whole network. So there's a lot more opportunity available to customers in Oklahoma than you'd be surprised to know around the rest of the country. And there's a long way to go to encourage investment in these kind of advanced systems. There are regulators that still don't want to spend that money. And that's one of the policy challenges we're facing. But part of that is letting customers know what they can do, because the optimal gains from knowing what you're doing and how you're consuming, not everybody's going to do that. You know your friends and neighbors. Some of them know exactly how much they spend every month on electricity, but they don't really care how or why. They just track the number. There are others, probably like some of the guys at this table, that really into KW and KWH. I mean, I log into my Smart Hours chart a couple times a week in the summer to make sure my thermostat's turning off appropriately in the afternoon, right? Not everybody's going to do that, but we have to have systems and tools and applications that allow this diverse customer mix to optimize their particular consumption patterns needs. And it's coming. And that's where the real value is going to come on the technology side, the investment these guys are making in networks. But we have to make sure there's an external focus, and that's always been a challenge.
Very good. Thank you, Cody. Steve, you're focused on the distribution transmission side. There's just as much going on that side as there is on the power generation side. How would you describe the capabilities of digital technologies on that side of the business, and where do you see it headed?
Well, that's a great question. Been a lot of good answers provided so far about where we have been and where we are today in a very short period of time. But in terms of data collection on the distribution system, at PSO, we installed our automated metering infrastructure in 2016 to all 560,000 customers. And prior to that, we really just had kind of a manual meter read. We would enter that into a handheld device. We didn't have a lot of data points, didn't have a lot of ability to do analytics with that information, but we capture 8.5 billion data points a year from those meters. So there's a whole bunch of other things that we capture information from and with, but just talking about AMI meters, 8.5 billion data points. So the real trick for us and the trick for the industry and others that have gone through digitization is how do you take this mountain of data and transform that into operational or decision-making information? That's the real trick. Sean mentioned data scientists, analytics, all those sorts of things play a huge role in the operation of our system. So there's just a number of things, and I think we've just scratched the very tip of the iceberg in terms of how we use that information. But a couple of examples that would illustrate how powerful this data collection is and how it helps us provide better service to customers, maximize the operation of our system, be more efficient in operations. We can actually spot equipment failures before they occur. So we've got all these data points. We can measure voltage at all these points along the circuit, and we can tell if the voltage has a certain profile, if that piece of equipment is prone to failure or close to failure. And it's extremely accurate in predicting that. And so what it enables us to do is an example and how that benefits customers. If we have a transformer that has a voltage profile that indicates failures near term, we can schedule a downtime. We can work with the customer to do that. We can do that on straight time hours, so it's less expensive than it would be if it were after hours, and we can take care of that problem. Another thing that's really fascinating to me as I look at all this mountain of data just from AMI, not all the other things that we capture data on, we can actually spot electric car installations, which is really important to us because if you are keeping up with the electric vehicles and chargers, if you keep up with the charging technology, the most recent advancement that's a level 3 charger. So it's a fast charge, and they're trying to get the charge time down as close as they can to the same sort of act and time as filling your tank with gasoline is the objective. So if you think about this charger, it's around 20 kW demand. So we believe, and I think most of the industries believe, that yeah, you have to have some charging for across the state or transit long distances, but most people that own electric vehicles are going to charge at home. So if you start adding 20 kW to a system never designed for those sorts of loads, you better be paying attention to what that's going to do to voltage and reliability and equipment failures and all those sorts of things. So that's just another example of something that proactively we can address by knowing, and no one's going to tell us that they've connected a level 3 charger in their garage. So knowing that in advance, being able to take some corrective actions on that's really important for us. So a couple of examples, but I was chuckling when Sean was talking about how we used to do things, and I've nearly 30 years of experience in this business. And it's not that long ago that exactly like Sean explained, if we had a storm roll through Tulsa, it was an analog manual process to figure out where the outages were, how to prioritize crews and work, and now we know exactly who's out. We know how long they've been out. We're able to group those outages together. We're able to operate much more efficiently. You mentioned nested outages. The storm blows through. You think you've picked everybody up. You got to wait for that phone call the next day. Now we poll the meters. We can actually send a signal to the meter, receive confirmation back that the power's on. So just I'm excited about where we're headed. We have been through such a transformation, but I think at the very start of that transformation is occurring now. So it's going to really revolutionize our business. It's going to help us provide better services and options to our customers, and it's going to make us operate more efficiently and more reliably. So we're excited at AEP, PSO to see that occur.
That is truly amazing. The sheer volume of data that we now have access to, and I think, as you mentioned, the big challenge is making sense of that data with the right data management systems and software solutions released by companies like Black & Veatch, Burns & McDonnell, and other companies. Don, you've been a witness to the evolution of the industry for years. How would you describe where we're at today, and how do you see this industry evolving?
That's a big question. Have been around the industry a long time, and you know, and kind of dovetailing on something Donnie said earlier, a large number of coal-fired plants in this country were constructed in the 50s and 60s. In Oklahoma, PSO and OG&E had some construction, I think, up into the 80s. And to give you a perspective from a timing, regulatory sort of format, coal-fired plants could simply be repaired and would continue, or maintained and would continue to generate for years and years and years. The 1990 Clean Air Act amendments came into place when I was a much younger lawyer. And from that point moving forward, the country, through the US EPA, decided we're going to have to get busy and adopt a lot of regulations. And what you don't really see in the newspapers from a timing perspective was a lot of the change that was driven on older technology was in fact driven out of Washington as a result of the 1990 Clean Air Act. Once the regulations were put in place, decisions had to be made. But keep in mind, this occurred over a large number of years. And I'll get to where we're at today in 1 second. But over 2 or 3 decades, We had opportunities to make decisions. Do we want to put scrubbers onto these plants? Do we want to invest, in some cases, tens of millions of dollars in the existing technology? The regulations became very aggressive, and in many cases, companies had to decide it's not worth it. It's not worth investing dollars and technology to control an older plant. That pressed the country to look at new technologies. But this process occurred over a period of years, and again, was largely driven by regulation out of Washington. Well, where are we today? We had, in some cases, decades to make decisions, business decisions. Today, we don't have that luxury. The industry doesn't have that luxury. Sean made the comment. These three guys made the same comment. As a lawyer in working with a variety of clients around the country, a lot of times decisions have to be made much more quickly. And for example, another factor that drives this dynamic, our firm works with a group out of New York that are looking to invest in wind. The common statement that this individual makes is Oklahoma is the Saudi Arabia of wind. Now think about this for a second. Saudi Arabia of wind. As Sean points out, power generation in Oklahoma is already among the lowest cost in the country, if not the lowest. We have wind resources sitting primarily in western Oklahoma. Decisions have been made in recent years to heavily invest in that sector, along with combined cycle gas generation, which can ramp up and down really quickly and marries up nicely with wind generation. The reason this is so important to Oklahoma is we are uniquely situated. We're in a moment in time right now in this country, in my view, over the 35 years I've been in this business, that allows Oklahoma, if we take advantage of these rapidly changing technologies, we could put ourselves in an incredible position from a business perspective to attract further industry to Oklahoma. The last thing I'll say is this, at least on this question. I travel a lot around the country, and I talk to a lot of people, and I always ask people around the country, have you ever been to Oklahoma? A lot of people in New York or D.C. or other places, no, I haven't been there. Well, why? Why haven't you been to Oklahoma? And we get into this conversation, and in some cases I've talked to CEOs of companies around the country, and I will ask them, you need to consider putting a facility in Oklahoma. Why haven't you done that? Well, don't know much about Oklahoma. You can tell this energy story. Everyone knows we produce oil and gas, lots of it, and historically lots of it, very important to the state. But we're at a crossroads where if you combine the technology that is so rapidly evolving now, battery storage, for example, and I will digress. I was with a company 15 years ago that had spent $500 to $700 million on battery technology. Unfortunately, they were, on the cutting edge and got cut, right? But we learned a lot through that process. Storage is now to the point where we can combine storage out in western Oklahoma with these wind resources. We can, during peak times, offload the power from these turbines into the grid and store the power overnight. All of this can drive costs lower, make the state much more attractive on a going forward basis in terms of business development.
All right, thank you, Don, and I agree with you. I think you're right. I think energy storage is coming to Oklahoma. Let me start with you, Donnie. As you install more sensors and more technology to power generation equipment, obviously there are a lot of benefits. But But I think also there's some risk involved in adding more technology to not only power plants, but whatever business you're in. What are some of the opportunities of this technology for power plants and the power generation side, and what are some of the threats or some of the risk of adding all this technology?
Sure. So opportunity is, reliability and, really just predictability. With our assets, we really, in the last especially 10 years, control systems has changed our world. I mean, we have more data to deal with now than honestly we know what to do with. I mean, we're just at the tip of the spear right now trying to understand how we manage all that data. We've been working with Emerson Electric for years on upgrading all of our control systems across our fleet, and now we've just got this mountain of data coming in. We've described it as a mountain of data a few times. I love the way Steve and Sean mentioned data scientist. Okay, I'm a Six Sigma black belt, and I was standing in front of our board a couple of months ago, and I said, my Six Sigma black belt doesn't mean anything anymore. It's data scientist today. And because today we have so much data, and it takes a lot of experience to understand what to do with that data. So, the big thing is just what are we going to do with that data, and where's it going to? So now our generation fleet, our combined cycle fleet, for example, GE, all that data goes to GE, and they're monitoring it 24/7. That's a great thing because now we get a call from GE and say, hey, we're seeing this little thing happening. We can shut the unit off before something happens severely. That could cost us millions of dollars. And now we're putting that same technology on coal plants and on CTs and on the old legacy gas as well so that we can monitor those so that we can predict something or see it starting to trend and shut things down before something catastrophic happens. So I think that's the biggest thing is a cost savings we've been able to see over the last several years from equipment failures. And I know you understand this, but when turbines and generators fail, it's significant. I mean, it's not minor. We deal with big motors and big pumps. These are not small. So again, we're talking hundreds of thousands and tens of millions of dollars when we have failures. So I think that predictability is critical. I'll also mention, we have a new saying at OG&E that where we have to grow the member. We call our employees members. And when we talk about all this data coming in, the needs of our member of the future, I refer to it as the member of the future, it's different. We can't just hire somebody right off the street any longer. We used to do that, and we spent 5 years training them to get to where they need to be. We can't do that now because of retirements going on, and we all know that's happening everywhere. We have to have someone, we've got to encourage these young kids. We've got to do a better job of getting into schools and selling our industry. And we've got to get in there and talk to those grade schoolers and middle schoolers and help them to understand the very different hats that we can wear at a utility. Whether you want to be an engineer, whether you want to be a technician, whether you want to be a mechanic, whether you want to be a lineman, whatever. But we need new skills, and we need to encourage them to go to technical schools so that instead of 5 years of training, we can train them in 2.5 years, which is our goal right now. So it's creating a whole different member of the future as well. And then lastly, you talked about threats. Of course, Sean mentioned it. It's everybody's talking about it. It's one of the top concerns of every CEO, and that is cyber. I mean, and he nailed it. Every bit of technology we add right now, we have to run it through our security organization to determine the threats. And we also have a firm called Dragos, and they're helping us in the area of cyber. A great company. It's one of those companies Sean talked about that we invested in, and we now use them all the time now, and they are helping us tremendously. But cyber is definitely one of those that we think about constantly now. So,
absolutely. I think we've actually had incidents in this country of hackers actually getting through and infiltrating nuclear plants in this country and doing it successfully. which is a scary thing to think about. Let me turn to Steve for a second. Steve, what in your view will it take to move us forward, to take all the promises and possibilities of big data and technology advances and turn them into actual reality?
Well, I think one of the things that has to happen in order to enable technology to make us competitive economically with surrounding states for jobs and businesses is to make sure the grid is stable and it's ready for two-way power flows, it's ready for customer-owned generation, it's ready for storage, it's ready for electric vehicles, that we provide customers the options they want, whether that's renewable power options, whether that's battery backup or ride-through or standby generation, whatever that is. I think all those things have to be in place, but there's one fundamental component that has to be there in order for that to all work as it should, and that's the grid itself. So across the country, much like roads and bridges, Donnie and I have talked about this, much like roads and bridges, those things are aging, they have to be replaced. So certainly we're doing some replacement work year over year, but we have to greatly accelerate that replacement of the infrastructure. It's aging. So you can have the shiniest technology, the most whiz-bang sorts of applications, but if the grid's not stable, that stuff's not going to work. And so it's a multi-year endeavor in order for us to do that. And there's some real challenges associated with grid modernization and infrastructure replacement. Donnie talked about staffing. So that's a huge concern for us because everyone's trying to do something similar across the country at the same time. There's a finite amount of line resources and engineering resources to do that work. And so we're really going to have to step up our game as an industry to recruit folks into the utility business, and not just the standardized skill sets that we've had for 100 plus years as an industry, but the technological skills, the data analysts, those sorts of things, data scientists. And we're going to have to transform our own workforce so that we are more able to operate with all the digitization that's on our network currently, and it's going to continue to expand. It's expanding exponentially, actually. So as an example of that, so my whole career, I've been worried on the wire side that when the poles are down, the wire's down. That's the priority, right? You got to get the power back on. And that will always be the priority. But on these same structures, the things that we use to read meters or that we use for distribution automation controls is a communication network that we've built and we own and operate as well. And so that has a very high priority. So the folks that we send out to do that work, to make those repairs on a pole, have to have the abilities, in my opinion, to be able to do the other work, the other technology work, or it's a greatly inefficient sort of operation. So lots of great things on the horizon, but when you see us as an industry talking about grid renewal or grid modernization, I hope you understand and can support that that has to take place. If we don't do that in Oklahoma, we're going to be left behind in terms of economic opportunities.
Exactly. You know, when you think about all the advancements in technology today, and you think about the many changes in the types of power that we're using, more utilities are getting into the business of distributed generation. We're seeing a comeback of CHP plants, combined heat and power. You almost, the way we produce, distribute, and consume power nowadays is completely changing. It contradicts the traditional business model of the past. I don't think electric utilities make money anymore from building new power plants. It's going to have to come from some other way, and you almost have to wipe the slate clean. And one of those areas of change are electric markets. And Cody, can you talk a little bit about how electric markets may change with all of this new data?
We're limited only by sort of our imagination, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, and the regulators,
yeah.
Right? Letting you do stuff. What you haven't had before is good information upon which to make decisions. So now we can operate a grid more efficiently. And we're wrestling with the issues of managing loads from a generation into the market. I saw a map recently of the wholesale real-time pricing wholesale markets Texas, and they went from, and I forgot the coloring, but West Texas, panhandle of Texas, was markedly different than the coloring on the pricing in Houston. and the price of electricity in Houston was running at 9, 10 cents, whatever, and it was literally negative pricing for electricity in West Texas, okay? Surplus wind. They were literally paying people to take our power. Now, the problem is delivering it from West Texas to markets and to loads. And we've had that issue in Oklahoma. Transmission lines, access, capacity. We got to build bigger pipes to get the power out. So with the ability of big data and systems, sophisticated systems to manage in real time, and with storage coming, and Sean's absolutely right, storage will be the biggest change and enabler in markets. We work with utilities in Arizona where the standard load profile used to be that. Now it peaks and it drops dramatically during the day as sun. They have so much solar production now. They're literally looking for ways to encourage people to consume more electricity between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Okay? Because they're getting real close to having to shut down their big baseload power plants, and that's nuts. It's so inefficient to do that, right? So when storage comes along, it's going to enable all of that. So let's say we can smooth all that out, and now we get really clear pricing signals. Now you've got the ability to develop market structures and offers into customers to say things like, I want to be 100% renewable, and I can follow, right? I either want a fixed price based on seasons, or I'm willing to play, and I want day-ahead hourly pricing. OG&E has a day-ahead hourly pricing product for their industrial customers, and a 4-hour block pricing for their smaller commercial customers, not coffee shops, but commercial customers. And for those customers that want to play that game, they can save a lot of money. They can increase a tremendous amount of consumption. OU, for a while, was generating power on campus with a gas turbine. And through the RTP product with OG&E, they were able to track electric prices on an hourly basis. And they knew when the prices were forecasted to go above 10 cents, they could, because of the gas supply contracts, they could save money by generating their own electricity on campus. And you'd see their curve go like this, right? And the way OG&E designed the rate, you paid the hourly price for that hour, and you had a baseline, and if you were above the baseline, you paid that incremental price for everything above the baseline. If you were below your expected consumption, you got paid that hour's price. And they figured out, OU did for a while, how to sell power back at 22 cents because it was only costing them 10 to generate it on their side. They 1 month, they had 1 million kilowatt hours of consumption over their expected baseline, and they saved $170,000, right? And that's an aggressive manager. Not everybody's going to do that, but those are the kind of market structures that are enabled by this flow of data. It's optimizing and making generation efficient. It's also developing solutions that flow that data through to customers in a way that customers want to consume it. That's not going to work for residential customers, right? Smart hours, OG&E is actually very aggressive in the Smart Hours program, and we've worked with a lot of utilities around the country, and you're lucky if you get 5, 6, 7% of your residential customers want to participate in those kind of programs, and I think the numbers at OG&E are 20, 25%. It's just amazing. So there are people that want to do that, but we have to understand that not every customer is going to want to play those games, and so you have to have a broad menu of options, and I really don't know where pricing is going to go and the flexibility of pricing. I just know that given the amount of data that we're generating through the advanced metering and smart grid distribution management, we're not going to be limited anymore in getting that information out there. We're only going to be limited by sort of our ability to think outside the box and to market, right? Build the tools that share the information to folks, help them understand it, and then help them get through that.
Yeah, big issue. Anyone else want to elaborate on that? Don?
I'd actually like to ask Cody, as a former regulator, a question.
Does this bring back old days?
It does, and you know, I remember getting slapped down a few times when I had to address him at the commission. So you know,
deserved.
It's revenge. No, you know, we talk about big data. We know it's all here. We know things are rapidly changing, and then you mentioned transmission. We're constrained. How do we combine with those two variables in effect, Cody? how does the commission need to address what appears to be a loggerhead? Or if we're not there, we're getting very close. How do we try to address those two concerns, big data and transmission constraints?
Well, ultimately, it comes down to dollars, right? And sadly, regulators, for whatever reason, usually it's political, don't ever want to be associated with raising rates. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in meetings, whether it was when I was on the commission in Oklahoma or when I was in the national regulatory meetings, and sitting around at lunch with your colleagues, and people would brag about how they had not voted for a rate increase in 10 years or 20 years or whatever it was, which when you think about it is nuts. Now, granted, you have to watch closely how regulated companies spend their money, right? You don't want them doing silly things. Right? We don't want jets and all that kind of stuff. We get that. And by and large, those things have gone away, right? So you have very efficiently, or much more efficiently operated organizations today. But there seems to be an unwillingness on the part of policymakers to invest in technology and in future. Now, I don't know if it's because they don't think it's going to pay off. I mean, that's a legitimate issue, right? The other side of that, though, is what are you giving up by not doing it? I have no doubt that the Oklahoma Corporation Commission would not have approved OG&E's request to install advanced metering infrastructure in 2008 and 9 if the federal government hadn't agreed to pay over half, 70% of that cost of that system, okay? And that's unfortunate. We would have missed out on that opportunity because, as Sean told you today, we have some of the lowest rates in the country if you're on the OG&E system. And I'll be happy to share with you what we see as average rates around the country. But it's the political nature of wanting to appear to be thoughtful and hard, and we're not going to let those guys get by, instead of being able to articulate a vision as to why we need to invest in going forward. And it's not just the fact that in Oklahoma the commission's political because we're elected, because in other states they have the same kinds of issues, right? There's always seems to be political pressure that's out there, and that's that balance. And that's why I would argue that the only way we're going to get the resources deployed is to make sure that customers understand the value of these kinds of investments. So it's fun and sexy and really cool from a technical standpoint to talk about all the internal technologies and things like that that are coming from efficient generation, and smart grids and self-healing networks and all of that. But if customers and consumers don't understand the value to them, because we're not sharing the information to them in a way that's they consider to be useful, then you're never going to get the critical mass you need to go forward. But once people see that, and I think in Oklahoma we've got consumers that, at least if they travel a little bit, they see what other people pay. But some of the cool stuff that's going on here in terms of technologies available to them, there's less of that pitchforks and torches at the commission screaming, "Don't let them do this to me," right? We have to find a way to get rid of it. But too many times as an industry we look internally, we don't look externally. And that's the trick, I think, is to do it, because commissioners, believe me, nobody's going to lead on their own and say, ooh, I think I want to give PSO $300 million more to go do stuff, right? They're just, we're not going to get there. And that's the nature of our political system.
Yeah, and that's a big issue here in Oklahoma. I think the commission just recently had a big meeting with all the utilities to discuss their grid modernization plans so they can get prepared for considering these issues. I know Cody has addressed this in part already, but let me ask you, Don Shandy, have regulations kept pace with evolving technologies?
No.
Okay, let's move on.
I think this area is very similar. If you look at Google and Facebook, privacy protection, those kinds of issues that various states and particularly Congress is struggling with now, I think we're in a similar situation. Maybe not as as acute perhaps as what I just described with social media, but I do think that regulation needs to evolve. We need to figure out a way to and do it fairly quickly, a way to accommodate a lot of these needs that have been shared this morning. I think a lot of that, though, with regulation, you have to go through a notice and comment period, and the whole process is very laborious, and it takes time. So I wouldn't say our situation is unusual to what we see in other forums with other major issues that we struggle with. But there's no doubt that we need to be aggressively looking at our regulatory environment and figuring out how we improve that. And I know I sound like a broken record, but we have so many advantages in Oklahoma if we would just figure out a way, whether it's constraint on lines or whatever it may be, figure out a way to address these concerns. I'm confident we could not only greatly improve the system, we could drive costs lower, and we can become even more attractive to business development in Oklahoma. And I know everybody on this panel agrees with that approach.
Very good, very good. Let's move on. PSO and OG&E have aging infrastructure, and this question applies to both Steve and Donnie. How do you go about balancing the need to add new technologies while also having to replace an aging system, an aging infrastructure? I'll start with you, Donnie. Is that okay?
Well, I think a big part of it's the conversation that Cody and Don just had, and that's cost recovery. Sean has a term where he says generation is the biggest bet OG&E makes, and it is. I mean, it can be an $800 million play to build a 500 megawatt plant. And so, and think of this, that's for 5 years ahead. So we're thinking 5 years ahead right now. And so just to start engineering to the time you get that generator on, that's 5 years. So we've got to look into the future. So it's a big bet. What's going to change over the next 5 years? DC changes. New regulations come out. New regulators, new commissioners. I mean, so many things can change. So all that thought is in our head as we think ahead. And then there's everybody thinking something different 5 years from now, right? Gas prices drop from $6 to $2. Why not more gas, right? I mean, so that's what's in our head constantly, is trying to think 5 years from now. So, but at the same time, we're trying to protect the customer's bill. And I want to pause on that for a second. Years ago, we called the customer a ratepayer because that's how we looked at them. They paid their bill. Today, it's totally different. Today, they are the customer. Today, one of our key initiatives is around customer experience. So when we think of all these aging infrastructure, we also put into that equation the customer experience. It's how we talk to the customer. We talked about it earlier. Now, we're getting pinged right away to understand the customer's out. But on the other side, the customer is saying, hey, could you send me a text and tell me when I'm going to be restored? So now we're planning, we're trying to predict restoration times as well. So again, it's that old infrastructure, new technology. So, I think I bounced on that answer, but I'm trying to bring that customer experience and this cost recovery back into this conversation, because that's what we're listening to. We have to listen to the regulator on one side and the customer experience on the other. And then Don said it a couple of times, we're also moving into this world of grow the community. We want to bring more business to Oklahoma. And so we play a major player now at that economic development table. We do have the lowest rates in the country. And by the way, some people like to say, yeah, you got the lowest rates, but gosh, it's so hot in the summer. Surely your customers pay more on average as far as the bill. No, they don't. Our rates are so low that our customers' annual bill is lower than the national average. Commercial and industrial customers' average annual bill is lower than the national average.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the customer experience because in the end it comes around to the customer. I remember having a conversation with the chairman of Duke Energy, Jim Rogers, and we were talking. Not much has changed in how you produce power. You generate heat to create steam to turn a turbine. But he said something that sticks with me today. He said the biggest change happened in 2007 when this came out. When Apple came out with its iPhone, customers are looking for service more like Uber, more like Amazon Prime, and so it all comes back to the customer. Steve, how does PSO go about balancing the need to maintain such a massive infrastructure and at the same time the need to implement new technologies?
That's a great question, and we're really focused on reliability and rates as well. We've got extremely, really good reliability across the board at PSO and extremely low rates. And so we're trying to do the optimal sort of decision making for our customers for their benefit. So you've got a limited amount of financial resources, you've got a limited amount of resources that can accomplish some organizational capacity limitations, right? So you're trying to pick the things, the endeavors that have the greatest impact on customers while you're trying to balance, like Donnie mentioned, you're trying to balance costs and you're trying to balance reliability. So we've got a really broad portfolio, especially if you look back a number of years and compare our approach to running the business to what we do today. So we're focused on a bunch of different things. So I'll give you a couple of examples of things that we wouldn't have talked about a few years ago, or it wouldn't have been packaged this way anyway. So one of those is to take a look at, is there a technology deployment we can put in place that can defer a capital investment that keeps rates low for customers but still maintains reliability? So an example of that would be a non-wires alternative. And as a wires person, my entire career, that sure got my attention the first few times I heard that. But what we're talking about is energy efficiency or customer education or control of equipment beyond meters, things like that can help lower that demand for just a period of hours and lots of times, so you don't have to make a capacity increase on the transmission, substation, distribution side of the business. So we still have this incredible burden, I talked about this earlier, of trying to transform the grid itself, the aging infrastructure that we have in the grid, balancing that with customer expectations for technology deployments. And so that's a tough act to follow. And something really needs to change, in my mind, around our regulatory structure there. There needs to be some alternative means of rate recovery to incent or accelerate activities like grid modernization or infrastructure replacement. That has to happen. But every year, and we have multi-year plans, we're taking a look at what technology is available. We're talking to our counterparts in the industry. We're talking to folks that have experienced a lot of the DER issues, distributed energy resource issues like rooftop solar and storage, like California and Arizona, Hawaii, Germany, all those folks. We're talking to those folks and paying attention and trying to make sure that not only making good decisions for today, we're making good decisions for the next few years, for the life of that asset or the life of that decision that we've just made. So it's getting tougher and tougher and tougher. And the other thing that's coming our way, too, is an industry that will further complicate this balance between kind of the blocking and tackling part of our business, maintaining and operating the grid and the technology deployments, is that when the customer technology is connected to our system, the complexity of operating our system goes up dramatically. So we have a one-way power flow for the most part now. We have a few customers that generate power, but for the most part it operates today like it did 50, 60, 80 years ago. We have central plant generation. We have a transmission line that delivers the energy to a load center and distributes that to customers. The power flow is one way. And so planning for that operation, planning for capacity increases is a pretty straightforward sort of thing, or something we're certainly accustomed to doing for a long period of time. But when you start moving the generation assets out on the fringes of the system, the periphery of the distribution system as an example, that completely changes how you plan, and it completely changes how you control the system hour by hour, day by day. It's much different. So as an example, if we have a high penetration, or were to have a high penetration of rooftop solar in an area, cloud cover for a couple of hours might really impact the way we have to design the grid. We may have to supplement power where other times of the year the power's met, maybe more than met, by rooftop solar needs. So that's just that's a fascinating sort of complicator that we're going to have to deal with as an industry, and that will require a lot of our resources, both organizational capacity and financial resources, to deal with that issue too. So that's one more thing we're going to have to juggle.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Steve. I'd like to let everyone know we have about 15 minutes left. We would love to have questions from the audience. We will have a mic available if you have a question. So,
I've actually never even thought about my participation as a partner in this whole energy infrastructure before this conversation. And as I think about the complexity of what you must be dealing with just new technologies coming out, the data ontologies of all that information, how you manage it, as you collect this, there's obviously a tremendous amount of value for marketing the information, right, to companies that would want access to, I guess I'll call it, my energy identity. Who actually owns that information, and can you market that to organizations? And if you can't, second part of my question is there a way as a consumer we could opt in so that that information could be somewhat crowdsourced and made available to social networking platforms like Nextdoor and things that, you know, create awareness and transparency about my impact on the grid?
As the recovering regulator, and one who works on the customer side of this, if there's a tremendous amount of value in that information, right? You're absolutely right, both internally to the utility and externally to the customer. The customer needs to have access to that data. They need to control where that data goes. They should have the ability to say, I want my data to go here and there and there. But I would caution that I suspect that most consumers aren't that forward-thinking. We've done some work with working with utilities and residential customers and sharing how people are doing. There's Ian Ayers is a professor at Yale, and he did some really interesting customer response. And so Sacramento, the SMUD, they did a deal where they were comparing people to their neighborhood, right, so that everybody could see how everybody was doing. Unfortunately, they chose a frowny face and a smiley face, and the people that got frowny faces got all mad, right, because of course I'm not consuming energy like my neighbor. They're a retired couple. I have 3 teenagers. Of course I'm going to be, right? And we get into all of that. But from a marketing standpoint, I think customers need to have the right to direct their data, which is why you see Nest thermostats and things like that, okay? Now that tells you a little bit. The thermostat stuff tells you a little bit about it. Microsoft has looked at this. Google has looked at this, going to homes and gathering data, consumption data, and trying to monetize it, and they can't. Okay, it's really going to be hard, which is why I would argue utilities are in a prime spot to work with their customers and to maximize the value for both parties in that deal. Because I don't personally see a big socialization coming from energy consumption in that regard, because everybody's different. I'm different from you. I'm not like him. I'm going to do my own thing, right? And maybe they don't want to share that, but that's the challenge. How do we maximize the value in whatever the perception of value is? But I would tell you that since you've got millions of customers, there's going to be millions of different perceptions, and I don't know that there's going to be a seamless thing out there, and quite frankly, I don't know that people want their energy consumption data to be out there like their Google search data, right, and all the other things that these marketers are collecting on us. And when they find that out, that's going to make them nervous.
Yeah, you think about that, but in the same respect, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, well, I have devices on my hip and in my house listening to my conversations, and would I opt in to put those sort of things in my home and voluntarily basically surrender a certain amount of privacy? I choose to do that because of the convenience of that. And if you could give us our energy identity and give us the ability to share that information, think about the ability to, crowdsource Oklahoma's low-cost energy as a way of marketing the state for businesses and consumers.
So in the state of Texas, where they have competitive retail services for investor-owned utilities, not munis and not co-ops, they have my meter data, and they've come up with a clearinghouse of information. And as a customer, you can authorize retail energy providers to go pull your load profile data, and then they will design a specific marketing proposal to you, right? Oh, we'll give you nights and weekends free, or whatever it might be. So they're out there, but you're right, it has to be a customer opt. But I would just caution that I think it's going to be, the impact is going to be somewhat limited, because one of the challenges I have with my team is reminding them that just because we love KW and KWH and all of that goes into energy consumption, most people don't. They don't care. It's dollars is the metric that most consumers follow, right? So how do we give them that information? And the rules have to allow for that. It's got to be the customer's option, right, to do that. The utility, I don't think, should be able to take your information and go sell it to a third party as to, ooh, now you can come sell to this customer because they look like one of that, right? That's not the business they're in. You want to put your data out there and let people come to you, that's fine. Federal government has adopted the green button standard. They've promoted it. We'll see where it goes. But the idea is to come up with a standard data output format that utilities will provide this kind of information upon a customer request. It's standardized around so everybody can get there. The problem is where you don't have AMI, what you get is a monthly meter read. You consume 1,585 kilowatt hours this month. Great.
Yeah, I think I would actually be comfortable if you sold my information, if that gave you money to invest in infrastructure and help me reduce my power costs, right?
Right.
So if you could provide it to me and market it, it'd be great for everybody.
Well, they won't. I'm pretty sure regulators won't allow the utilities to market that information, but they would probably be willing to give you that option.
All right. Thank you, sir, for that question. Anyone else? Dewey.
If I remember correctly, many, many years ago, PSO decided to get out of the coal generating business, use of coal generated electricity, and rely upon the future assumption that natural gas prices would remain low for a lengthy time. And about the same time, OG&E decided to stay with coal in order to take advantage of a diversity of energy sources, potentially. I was wondering what each of you thought about that decision at that time today, but also if either of the companies are considering the use of nuclear generation at some point in the future to position yourself for that. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Dewey.
So I think I would answer that we feel like fuel diversity is critical. Again, it's all about long-range planning. You can be second guessed that gas prices, if they go from $2 to $6, or if they go from $6 to $2, right? I mean, and I think for us, it's that hedge for the customer to protect the customer's bill. But I would also say coal technology has changed dramatically. I mean, Sooner Power Plant is different today than it was 2 years ago. The emissions are completely different. Scrubber technology is amazing. I mean, the amount of emissions we have reduced out of that plant, and we elected to make some changes at Muskogee around low NOx burners as well to reduce emissions there. Of course, we converted to. I would tell you at River Valley, the plant that we picked up recently, which is a coal plant, which burns both PRB coal and Oklahoma coal. We've been doing some testing just in the last 2 months, and we've tested significant reductions in emissions at that plant. It's about, like we're talking about, it's about thinking differently. Sean Trosky challenged me from day one. Don't run River Valley like it's been run for the last 20 years. What are we going to do different? And I can tell you within 30 days, we started doing things different. And to reduce emissions and to reduce cost. I'm not going to talk about cost because I can't, but I can tell you we reduced cost significantly as well. So I think, but technology, going into the future, nuclear, we're not considering nuclear, but we're definitely considering solar, we're considering batteries, we're considering more CTs. Again, as we can continue to chase that wind, and one quick comment, Steve brought it up about EVs. As EV growth grows, your load curve, in the morning you peak because everybody's getting up, flipping on the lights, turning on the gas, everything. Then you go to work, it goes down. Then everybody comes home, you turn the lights on, start the washer and dryer and microwave, boom, comes back up. About 3:30 to 7 o'clock. Think of when people come in and also plug in their vehicle. It's called a double shift now. We're going to have 2 load curves. So technology, thinking of technology in the future, that's why it's so critical of how we're going to manage that load shift as more wind comes on, more solar, and then people start plugging in an EV.
All right. Go ahead, Steve.
Mayor Bartlett, that was a great question. So when we were contemplating the decision, begin to phase out coal and rely more on other fuels, natural gas, solar, wind, renewables, things like that. It was a lot to do with certainly the forecast for natural gas obviously played a big factor in that. So I think we've made a really good decision, and what it's allowed us to do is redeploy resources, financial resources, organizational resources on other things that have benefits from customers other than trying to keep pace with the changing and uncertain sorts of regulatory requirements or environmental requirements we had for coal production, coal-fired plants. So time will tell, but I think we've made a really good decision, and I think it's benefited customers already substantially.
Yeah, sure, Don.
I would address the mayor's question too. In terms of of nuclear, obviously probably virtually everybody in this room understands the cost structure. It's Donnie mentioned, you could build a combined cycle plant for probably $800 million, a coal facility, I don't know what, 10, 20 million, probably 30 maybe. Nuclear facility, multiples bigger than that. But having worked with Kerr-McGee and having been involved with the NRC and issues pretty intensely, I personally am very robust on nuclear power. I don't think it's the danger that some people think it is. I think it's very, very expensive. I think there are potential disposal issues, particularly when a Senate Majority Leader state has a Yucca Mountain located there and he doesn't want material coming in. So you got those kinds of political concerns. But having worked on climate change since '96 with the Clinton administration and through several Republican administrations, the issue is not going to go away. And the thing that I think will become more of a policy issue for our industry going forward is going to be how do we address the concern. Both sides are going to argue about what to do. I think the science about it is fairly clear. How and why it's occurring is probably still open to debate. However, nuclear power is a major answer to that question if we're willing to pay for it. So there are major policy concerns that the country is going to have to grapple with going forward, and there's a lot of debate on both sides of that story. So I don't think you've heard the last of nuclear power, and maybe for a while, but we have not heard the last of it.
Thank you, Don. I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. We're going to take a break. I'd like to ask you to be back at 10:20, but Don Shandy, Steve Baker, Cody Graves, Donnie Jones, thank you so much for your time and expertise. Thank you very much.